Hi, and welcome to Tom Kennedy Science, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. Today is part 3 of my series on the cell cycle, and this of course is for non-majors, so I'm not going into a lot of technical detail. I like to provide an overview of things so that it makes sense, and you can kind of gain a little bit of importance for why we want to talk about the cell cycle. Now, when we talk about the cell cycle, we're mostly talking about eukaryotic cells, this growth and then reproduction, growth and reproduction. And cells can also exit the cell cycle. Now, the cell cycle is important, right? Because, we're eukaryotic cells. We're made up of trillions of them. We're a multicellular organism. So our cells, they have to be controlled, right? They just can't be growing and dividing haphazardly. That would be cancerous, wouldn't it? So like this beautiful copperhead snake, it's an adult snake. It's an adult just like us, made up of lots of cells. And for it to be a multicellular organism, those cells have to be regulated through the cell cycle. Now, because I'm talking about the cell cycle in terms of chromosomes and how they align and stuff like that, what I want to do before I get really started in the overview of the cell cycle is go over some words, some terminology. I know, all those fancy science words. But I try to keep things simple, but sometimes it's just a little bit easier if we can all learn just a few vocabulary words. And these words, these are ones that you will see when anybody talks about genetics. So I'm not going to get too complicated here, but I definitely want to get us on the same page. And the sooner we can do this, the better it is. So let's start with these vocabulary words. Soma. Soma means body. So when I talk about the somatic cells, these are the cells of our body. So all your liver cells, muscle cells, skin cells, all the 200 different types of cells in your body, they form our somatic cells. And our gametes, if you're a guy, you make sperm. If you're a lady, you make eggs. Those are haploid, right? Oh, I used a new word, haploid and diploid. Our somatic cells are diploid. Di means two. Ploidy has to do with chromosome numbers. So on the right, that picture is a karyotype. Karyotype just means it's an image of our chromosomes. So our chromosomes, chromo means colored. There's that word soma again. It means body. These are colored bodies. That's our DNA plus a bunch of proteins. And it's really condensed into these things that you can actually see. So when we talk about it being diploid, our somatic cells, you have 46 chromosomes in each somatic cell. What does that mean? Okay. You've got 23 from mom and 23 from dad. So you have 46 pairs. Now, they are also called homologous chromosomes. Not homologous, homologous. I actually pronounced this one correctly. Homologous chromosomes. Think about it this way. You've got 23 chromosomes. They are named 1 to 22. Chromosome 1 being the largest chromosome, 22 being the smallest chromosome. Oh wait, didn't I say we had 23 pairs? That's the X and the Y forms the 23 pairs. So if you have chromosome 1, the same gene will be located at the same position on that chromosome from your mom and your dad. So the gene for like blood type, A, B, or O, I believe it's on chromosome, 6 or 7, and it's always in the same place. So here we go. We inherit our chromosomes from our parents. Now, we all have the same genes. Oh, I know. I just threw a curveball at you and I said we all have the same genes. We have about 20,000 of those different genes. What we have are different versions of those genes called alleles. A, B, and O is a great example of an allele, right? You got A blood, you got B blood, or you got O blood. Those are different types of alleles. Those are different versions of those genes, and they were caused by mutations. Now, our chromosomes, when the cell is not dividing, exist as something called chromatin. It's just like, imagine you take your chromosomes, a ball of yarn, and spread it all out. And the chromatin involves all of our DNA and these proteins. And then when you divide, you copy it, and they're held together, and they're called chromatids. And when you hold both chromosomes together, they're called sister chromatids. And this happens when you're about to divide the cell. Now, right up until the cell divides, these two copies are held together, like I said, as chromatids, and both of them together are considered chromosomes. And then when you pull those apart, the two chromatids become individual chromosomes. And then the location of where they hold the two chromosomes together is called the centromere. That's very important in cell division, but that's where certain parts of the cell will attach to it so you can pull it apart. So there you have it. There's our brief introduction into some general terminology that you will find helpful, like diploid, haploid, homologous chromosomes, and sister chromatids. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump into an overview of the cell cycle. And remember, this is important. I talked about this in my introduction because every one of us starts off as a single-celled zygote, and then through mitosis, we grow into an adult. I know, it's hard to believe, isn't it? And all of our trillions of cells are regulated when to grow, when to divide, when to die, when to come out of the cell cycle, right? So that we can exist as a multicellular organism. So, that's it, right? So the cell cycle goes round and round and round, growth, division, growth, division, growth, division. And if a cell is in the cell cycle, it's either an interphase or mitosis, the mitotic phase. An interphase is when the cell is preparing to divide. It also includes the S phase, which is replicating its DNA, then once again preparing to divide, and then the mitotic phase, which includes cell division. Now most cells, or in fact all cells, they spend the majority of their time in interphase, right? Even a rapidly dividing cell will still spend 90% of its time in interphase where it's not dividing. Now interphase, this non-dividing time period of a cell's life, consists of three different phases. G1, the first gap, S phase, which is DNA synthesis, and G2, which is the second gap. And you're thinking, G1, G2, oh gee, why are they calling it G phases? It has to do with the gaps. You see, when scientists were first studying cells, they would see the cells go through mitosis and divide. They would also see it replicate its DNA. And there were gaps. The cell would divide. There'd be a space in time, a gap, right? The first gap. And then the cell would replicate its DNA. What's going to happen next? G2. Then there's another gap between the time when the cell replicates its DNA and divides again. Hence the gaps. And then, of course, the S phase stands for synthesis. And synthesis means putting together. You're basically copying the DNA, because you're making a copy of it. Now, the mitotic phase. This is where everybody is familiar with things like prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase. What phase did you just say? I'm lost in phase, and telophase, and why do I need to know this phase? We'll come back to that because understanding those phases is actually really, really, really cool. It's more than just memorizing, the position of a chromosome on a slide to be regurgitated in some lab class. These phases are actually really cool, and I hope to get you interested in that in the next lecture here, in the next talk. I digress. I'm sorry. The mitotic phase consists of two different phases. Mitosis, which is division of the nuclear material. That's dividing up the chromosomes. And then cytokinesis. Cyte, C-Y-T, means cell. Kinesis means to move. So I'm going to move the rest of the cell, all the organelles and cytoplasm, to opposite ends of the cell and divide up all the other parts that's not the chromosomes, it's not the nuclear material, to form the two cells. And often cytokinesis will overlap with the end of mitosis, but not always. Sometimes it can come afterwards. Now mitosis. This is a form of asexual reproduction. If you've got 46 chromosomes, how many chromosomes will your daughter cells have? 46. You're making identical copies with the exceptions of small variations like these clones. Now I know if you've seen the Clone Wars, you know not all the clones are exactly the same. That's pretty cool. Waiting for the Bad Batch. So if you think about it this way, we have cells in our body that are constantly being replaced and growing and dividing all the time. Your skin cells, the cells of the lining of your stomach, your esophagus, your intestines. And in fact, we call those epithelial cells. Epi means like around or above. Epithelial cells are the cells of the lining of our body. So when I told you in another lecture that we lose like 50 billion cells a day, a lot of them are epithelial cells that are constantly growing and dividing. They're not the only ones. Our blood cells are also being replaced daily as well. And of course, I have a photo of a mosquito I took taking a bite out of me. And yeah, You probably watched Nat Geo or Discover, Wild America or whatever. They always go, what are the 10 most deadliest animals on the planet? Well, there it is right there. It's a mosquito. Now, there are about 3,500 species of mosquitoes. Most are harmless, but there's about 5 or 6 of them that spread more diseases that have killed more human beings than any other thing on the planet, including the Anopheles mosquito that spreads malaria. Yeah, most dangerous animal on the planet right there. That's not Anopheles mosquito, so I'm okay. Now, we got this cell cycle where it's a mitotic phase and interphase. Now, think about your muscles or your nervous system. Your nerve cells, you may have nerve cells that are as old as you are. I'm 47. I've got nerve tissue in me. This is as old as I am. Those cells are no longer in the cell cycle, meaning they're not growing and dividing. They're in this G0 phase. Some people call it a quiescent phase. They're not metabolically inactive. They're not inactive. They're very active. I mean, my nerve cells, think about how much I'm working right now just doing this video lecture for you guys. They're completely active. They're just not growing or dividing. And cells can stay out of this cell cycle for however long you live. Now, sometimes when a cell is damaged, it can exit the cell cycle, repair itself, then enter back into the cell cycle. Or if it's beyond repair, it might commit suicide through a process called apoptosis. So let's just do a recap here. The cell cycle consists of 2 phases, interphase and mitotic phase. Interphase is the first gap, the S phase, which is DNA synthesis, or you're just copying your DNA, and then the second gap. And then you have the mitotic phase, which consists of mitosis and cytokinesis. And don't forget that mitosis includes things like prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Okay. Well, that's been another episode, and I hope you enjoyed this one.